The Sunday school lessons for June the 1st, 2025 are the offerings of Cain and Abel and gift giving that matters. Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. Welcome, viewers and subscribers, to my channel, Read With Me. I am Audrey. If you are new here, please know that this is an audio reading of the lesson with intermittent commentary. Please share this audio with others. Thank you so much for all that you do to help this channel grow. Verses 1 through 2. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." The Genesis record indicates that this was the first child of the first couple. God commanded the first couple to be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth. And Cain is the first evidence of that obedience. The name Cain sounds like the Hebrew word for acquire. Eve praised the Lord, acknowledging that this child was acquired with the help of the Lord. The name Eve comes from a Hebrew word meaning living. Adam had given her that name because she would become the mother of all the living. Eve was privileged to experience the fulfillment of that name. Verse 2. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Even then, gave birth to Abel, though we do not know how much time passed between the births of the two sons. No words of Eve are recorded following Abel's birth. The name Abel comes from a Hebrew word meaning breath or vapor. The intentionality of their name should not be lost, as a Hebrew hearer would recognize the lesson of each of the sons' names. Cain reminds us that life comes from the Lord, while Abel's name would remind the reader, the hearer, that life is brief, like a vapor. Now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. The account records the occupation of the two boys. Abel became a shepherd, while Cain tilled the soil. Tilling the ground is what Adam began to do after he and Eve were sent out of Eden. Genesis 3 and 23. Verses 3 through 5. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Adam and Eve would have taught their sons how to worship as they had learned from God while in the garden. While we do not know when the brothers began to offer sacrifice, we do know that they chose to worship through their giving. It is clear from the text that each man gave from the produce of his labors. Cain, already described as someone who worked the soil, brought something from the soil, most likely a grain or vegetable offering. Abel, a keeper of flocks, offered something from the firstborn of his flock. This description brings to mind later laws given to Israel. Nothing is said, however, about Cain bringing the first fruits of the soil, which was also later commanded of Israel. This may point to a higher quality of offering on Abel's part. Another indication of higher quality may be seen in how Abel brought fat portions as a part of his offering. Once again, later requirements in the law of Moses indicate the significance of offering the fat of any animal because all the fat is the Lord's. The fat was considered the choice portion and thus the best part of the sacrifice. Why did the Lord accept Abel's offering but reject Cain's? One proposal is that Abel's offering was a blood sacrifice, while Cain's was only a grain offering, not costing him much. If so, the hearts or attitudes of the two men were the key factor distinguishing the two offerings. At this point, the New Testament offers some important insight. Hebrews 11:4 states, "By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did." By faith, he was commended as righteous. Our text does not indicate precisely how the Lord expressed his acceptance of Abel's offering and his rejection of Cain's. Later, the Lord will speak to Cain, so he may have addressed each of the brothers, much as he had earlier spoken to the serpent, Adam, and Eve. Cain could have reacted with either remorse or anger. He chose the latter. So great was his bitterness that his facial expression showed his displeasure. As the sacrifices were acts of worship, Cain's heart posture is obvious. Verse 6. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?" God had addressed Adam with a series of questions following his and Eve's disobedience in the Garden of Eden. He questioned Eve as well. Then the Lord confronted Cain about his anger. His questions were designed to make Cain think about his condition, and they prepared him for the counsel the Lord was about to provide. The Lord was as concerned about the offerer as he was about the offering. Verse 7. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. All was not lost for Cain. He did not have to remain angry, but Cain's heart needed to change. Though the word repent is not used in this passage, Cain needed to do just that and determined to do what was pleasing to the Lord. If he did not take this step, sin was ready to exercise even further control over him. While the Lord did not specifically mention the devil, the language used in this verse is reminiscent of what Peter says about how the devil is like a roaring lion on the prowl, looking for someone to devour. The Lord's warning assumes that Cain had some understanding of sin. This is the first time the word is used in the Bible. Perhaps his parents had told him about their own sad experience with sin in the Garden of Eden and tried to warn Cain not to follow the same path. Sin did not have to have the upper hand with Cain any more than it did with his parents. If Cain did what was right, he would indeed rule over sin. Verse 8. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Anger is a powerful emotion that can be a gateway to sinful actions. The words, "let's go out to the field," are not in the Hebrew text. However, several ancient versions, including the Septuagint, the Greek text of the Old Testament, include Cain's words given in the NIV. At some point, Cain persuaded Abel to go with him to a field where the older brother took his younger brother's life. 1 John 3 and 12 offers insight into what motivated Cain to do the terrible thing he did to his brother. John contrasts the message of loving one another with the actions of Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. John then raises the question of why Cain killed Abel. The answer? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Rather than heed the Lord's counsel to do what was right, Cain harbored his bitter, envious feelings toward his brother to the point of killing him. It is sobering to consider that this early in the biblical record, we are still in a single-digit page in our Bibles, such a tragic act has occurred. Verse 9, Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord knew where Abel was and what Cain had done to him, just like he knew Adam's location when he asked him, "Where are you?" The question allowed Cain to do something right rather than allow sin to tighten his stranglehold on him. Cain, however, denied knowing where Abel was. He even became defiant in his reply, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Cain tried to deflect God's question away from himself, much like his father had done in his response to the Lord after being confronted with his disobedience. Verse 10, the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." The Lord asked yet another question of Cain, a question that revealed his full awareness of what Cain had done to his brother. The Lord's description of how Abel's blood was crying to him from the ground may indicate that Cain had buried his brother's body in an effort to conceal his deed. His parents, too, tried to hide their sin. The writer of Hebrews mentions Abel's blood, contrasting it with Jesus' blood, which speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Abel's blood cried out for judgment on his brother. Jesus' blood given at the cross speaks grace and forgiveness. Verse 11, now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Previously, the Lord had cursed the serpent because of its role in deceiving Adam and Eve. Here, Cain was cursed from the ground, meaning that the focus of the curse was to be the ground from which Cain made his living. Later, the law of Moses will describe an act such as Cain's shedding of his brother's innocent blood as a defilement of the land. Verse 12, when you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. The Lord had already told Adam that the ground would be cursed because of you, that is, because of his sin. Working the soil would become a rigorous, demanding task, and the ground would produce thorns and thistles. Here, God told Cain that his labor in the soil would yield nothing in return. Thus, what had been the source of productivity and satisfaction for Cain would become a source of frustration and devastation. The Hebrew word translated earth at the end of this verse differs from the word earlier rendered ground and indicates a much larger area, perhaps the entire planet, as it does in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. Cain was consigned to live as a restless wanderer, likely having to search for food from whomever would be willing to share with him. Verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear." Cain was grieved to hear that his livelihood was being taken from him. While he saw his punishment as severe, at a later time the Lord declared that death was the appropriate punishment for murder. Thus, Cain's punishment was less severe than it could have been. Verse 14, today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. At no point did Cain offer any admission of guilt or remorse for his action, like his father. Cain saw God as the culprit to be blamed for what lay ahead for him. Cain acknowledged that he could well become the target of revenge for his killing of Abel. Perhaps he was thinking of future family members who would learn of his despicable act. That Eve knew about it is clear from her statement in Genesis chapter 4, verse 25. One wonders how much Cain read into other people's thinking about the evils of his own heart. If others were like him, he was indeed in grave danger. Of course, it was not true that Cain would be hidden from the Lord. That is an impossibility for anyone, as David recognized in Psalm 139, verses 7 through 12. Verse 15, but the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. The use of the phrase 7 times over likely signifies completeness. That is, full vengeance will be carried out on anyone who kills Cain. It's all too easy to speculate about the composition of the mark placed on Cain and where it might excuse me, and where it might have been placed on his body. It would have had to be someplace visible, such as his forehead. A primary point not to be overlooked is the Lord's measure of grace by not administering the punishment of the death penalty that Cain, in fact, deserved. But such a penalty isn't announced until Genesis chapter 9, verse 16. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. We do not read of any expression of gratitude on Cain's part for the Lord's provision of protection from possible vigilante justice. Cain simply went out and began a new phase of his life in the land of Nod, a designation that means wandering. It was certainly a fitting location for someone who had been sentenced to live as a vagabond. Thank you so much for listening.